Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mini Scroll, the daily internet culture podcast bringing you the biggest stories from social media, the creator economy, and the digital space every Monday through Thursday. I'm your host, Lauren Meisner, the founder of the youth digital media brand Centennial World. Welcome back to Mini Scroll, everyone. I am in my Fashion Week outfit. Well, I have been the last 2 days, but this was the first day that I was dressed by a brand. So that's why I might look a little bit fancier. But it was actually my last day at Fashion Week. So Alex is going to something later this week for us. And then that is it. A wrap on Fashion Week. Oh my God. Also, I had such a wild experience last night. I talked about it on TikTok. I've been vlogging my week for you guys. So go follow me on TikTok if you don't, which I don't think hardly any of you do because I don't even have 1,000 followers. But I talked about it in that vlog and I put it on my reels as well on Instagram. But last night I was at a fashion show. It was a nighttime show. And on one side, on my left, was a man who was normal and we were making small talk and whatever. And then on my right was another man. And as soon as he sat down, I could just tell he was really drunk and just so obnoxious and loud. And oh my God, he was getting in my space so much. He would just lean over and make jokes. And anyways, I went into detail about it, but it escalated after man on my left told him to leave me alone because he just wouldn't get out of my space. He kept talking to me. He kept harassing me and bothering me. And at one point I was just I don't know what's going on. Basically saying please leave me alone. And then that's when guy on my left said to him leave her alone, dude, stop. And that pissed him off. And he ended up pushing me with all of his might, both arms, fully pushed me right into this other man because he was pissed, presumably, that we were telling him to stop and to leave us alone. And I fell backwards. It's benches that you sit on at Fashion Week. So there was nothing behind me. I was falling backwards. Thank God. I caught myself and the guy helped me on my left, helped me kind of get back up so I didn't fully fall on the ground, but it was horrific. So that was Fashion Week day 2 for me. But I just came back from a show and that was an amazing experience. I had a good time today. So let's get into today's episode. I was asked to speak about the Bumble celibacy ad and apology, and I was going to make it one of 3 stories today, but as I started thinking about it and writing it out, I realized there's just so much to say. So this will be the only story for today, and then tomorrow, even if the most happens overnight, I will just give you guys as many stories as I need to because I still really want to talk about the 2 other stories that I had for today, but it's going to be way too long. So let's get into Bumble, and this I feel deserves its own episode. All right, so Bumble has apologized for its anti-celibacy ads that sparked backlash earlier this week. So some background on these ads. As part of a rebrand for Bumble, the company placed billboards all around LA that poked fun at women choosing voluntary celibacy. One billboard said, "You know full well a vow of celibacy is not the answer." And another said, "Thou shalt not give up on dating and become a nun." Understandably, the advertising sparked intense backlash online, as obviously women are not resorting to something as extreme as celibacy or fully giving up dating for fun, right? It's a result of fearing for their safety and an amalgamation of experiences that just makes them feel like there's no point and I might as well just protect myself and my peace and stop dating. So this campaign was part of a bigger rebrand for Bumble. A few weeks ago, Bumble wiped its Instagram account and started teasing a new vibe for the brand. They posted a bunch of those dramatic painting inspired images of Victorian era women who were tired of dating. You know the ones, they were lounging around. It's the meme, right? They posted a bunch of things that were related to the meme. You know that baby, that Victorian era baby that's wrapped up swaddled, and it's me when I get home from work. That's literally me. That is actually me. So this style of imagery is very popular on TikTok. It's a meme that young people recognize, obviously, and it was a very chronically online move for the brand. And prior to them announcing what this actual rebrand was, which was essentially just some feature updates and allowing, in some cases, men to message first, which already sparked some backlash considering Bumble's whole thing is you make the first move, women taking their power back in dating. But anyways, people had high hopes for this rebrand, and it was like, oh my God, they're really targeting Gen Z and this is gonna work. Because the imagery and the vibe of their Instagram account, of their socials, like it felt very of the moment, it felt very on the pulse. So there were high hopes. But like I said, those high hopes came crashing down. I mean, crashing's a bit extreme, but it didn't live up to what people, I think, hoped for or expected based on the hype. And I would say, based on the rebrand, like the imagery that they used, the meme culture that they were leaning into, I would say that this rebrand was targeted at Gen Z. I think that makes sense. Gen Z probably has the biggest cohort of single women. And there has been research over the years that shows Gen Z is actually less sexually active and less interested in dating than previous generations. And we also know that Gen Z is just not as enamored with dating apps and online dating as previous generations were. I mean, I know for me, I was single when Bumble came out in my early 20s, and it was so exciting. And Tinder too. Like, I was on those apps when they first came out, and it was literally just Bumble and Tinder were the only two. I'm sure there were other dating apps, but those were the two that people were using. And it was so exciting. It was like something we'd never seen before. It was so novel. And obviously, that's just not how Gen Z feels about it, because they've grown up their whole dating life, they've had apps. So they are a difficult generation to reach in general for brands, but especially I would say for dating apps. The two biggest theories that people have when it comes to what went wrong here is, the first, people think there were no women in the room of like conceptualizing this campaign. And the second is they think Bumble didn't pre-test this campaign, which is, I'm not super sure, I might get this slightly wrong, but it's basically when they hire some external company and they like bring it to market before a brand actually brings it to market, you know? So they like test how consumers react to it, engage with it, and feel about it. So those are the two biggest things that I've seen on like marketing TikTok where people think that this went wrong. What I think went wrong, I don't think there was necessarily no women in the room. I think there might have not been any Gen Z women in the room. And the reason why I think that is because, to me, this feels like they tried to reach Gen Z by speaking to them as if Bumble is their friend. Like, they tried to jump in on Gen Z's very like specific and savage kind of humor that is very unique to that generation. But the problem is that, and I see marketers do this a lot, they lump millennials and Gen Z together as just one big generation of like young people. And they don't realize that there are so many differences between these two generations. For millennials, we loved when brands spoke to us like our friend. Like, if you think about the culture we grew up in, it was pre-social media, it was magazines. Like, that was our culture. That is how our formative years, like our preteen and teen years, that's what that was all about. And the concept of a magazine, especially like a preteen or a teen magazine, is to be like your bigger sister who is speaking to you like somebody who is older than you and is in the know and is giving you advice, right? That's kind of the whole thing, the whole shtick of those kinds of magazines. So millennials, like, we were down as fuck to be told who we were, what we liked, what we should be doing, what we should try. And we were down for that to come from like a friendly, quote unquote, voice. Gen Z is very different. They did not grow up with that type of media. They didn't grow up with magazines in that same way. And they grew up with influencer culture. They didn't grow up with people telling them what to do or who to be. They grew up with this whole platform like social media where you could find any type of person that you thought was cool and you could, you know, follow them and emulate them. And social media just gives you such an opportunity to express yourself and find your own niche where you don't have to be so uniform, in the same way that previous generations, you know, who are reading all the same magazines, we ended up being very much the same. So as a result, Gen Z is not so interested in being spoken to in that way of like telling them what to do. So the actual like ad copy on these billboards just didn't hit, because it was quite literally like thou shalt not, like telling them what to do. And they do not like that, even if it's like in a funny, quirky kind of way. Gen Z doesn't want that like friendship vibe from brands. Instead, they really want brands to address issues, and they want to feel supported and heard by the brands that they support. They want to feel in control. So off the bat, this messaging was always going to fall flat with Gen Z. And another big aspect of Gen Z is that they are a generation who are change makers and they set boundaries. And we know this. We talk about it all the time. Like there's so much conversation about how Gen Z has all these boundaries in the workplace. And, it's the same old thing. Millennials were entitled and Gen Z doesn't have a work ethic or whatever. Every generation has their thing when they're coming up and they're young. And the older generations don't understand how they work, but that's Gen Z's thing, is that they have these boundaries, right? So another aspect of why this didn't work out is Bumble's ads, they were making light of this boundary, which is something that really defines Gen Z and is kind of their superpower. However, the missing piece here that I have seen no one else discuss is why dating has become worse for Gen Z women. And I do believe that that comes down to internet culture. Young men now are so much more likely to be exposed to misogynistic, anti-woman, and incel ideology online than previous generations, thanks to the rise of social media and in particular in the last couple of years, TikTok. So previously, men who wanted to interact with that type of content, engage in that kind of ideology, they had to actively seek it out on places like Reddit or 4chan or probably deeper, darker places on the internet that I don't even know about. But now when you're just scrolling your For You page, you could be delivered content like that, let's say about looks maxing, for example, right? Which is not inherently anti-woman, but can open you up to the red pill or even black pilled pipeline. I mean, how many of us, like women, I know it's mostly women that listen to this podcast, how many of us are scrolling TikTok and we see content like that ourselves, right? Like I've seen so many videos about looks maxing. I did a whole podcast episode because I just kept getting bombarded by content about looks maxing. And if you Google looks maxing, like every major publisher has covered it because it is so prevalent on TikTok. Or if you think about a couple of years ago, before he was banned off of everything, like Andrew Tate was everywhere there for a couple of months, scrolling your For You page, you could not get off of it. I mean, what about like all those like bro podcasts, right? We're all exposed to that all the time now, whereas we would have literally never, especially as women, we probably would have never been exposed to anything like that before TikTok. So this constant exposure has made Gen Z and Gen Alpha men much more outwardly misogynistic. Now, I don't want to get it twisted. This is not me saying that Gen Z or Gen Alpha are more misogynistic than previous generations, because I think in many ways that's absolutely not true. But I think it has become more socially acceptable to follow these role models, quote unquote, who do espouse these types of anti-woman, misogynistic incel views. And B, I think boys and young men are more empowered than ever at the moment to be outwardly anti-woman because of how popular this type of content is. And that doesn't even touch on the fact that constantly being exposed to this type of content, whether you're seeking it out or not, or you believe in it or not, like how that must be inherently changing the way that boys and young men think about women, their attitudes towards women, their behaviors towards women. Like, I think a lot of it would be subconscious and happening without them even realizing it. The other side of that is this exposure to this type of content, like I said, is not exclusive to a man's For You page or a boy's For You page. Women are being fed this too. That's just how algorithms work, right? It's like you like one video and they're like going to test the waters and show you something else, and it could be totally out of left field, but it will have like some very slight connection to what you just liked. So women are constantly also being fed all of this content that is anti-woman, misogynistic, incel vibes that we would have not known about necessarily prior to social media and platforms like TikTok and Twitter. So that has made young women more aware of how dangerous men can be. And this is definitely a generalization, but I would say that young women of previous generations were a little bit more ignorant to how dangerous men could be and how unsafe they actually were around men. And social media, particularly TikTok, has really lifted that veil for the whole generation. And like I said, Gen Z, they're change makers. They set boundaries and they stick to those boundaries. So the changing culture online and how that is impacting young women dating right now, they're setting a boundary for themselves. They're saying, we're not going to stand for men being so violent towards us, so anti-woman, so misogynistic. We're not going to stand for this many men like buying into the red pill ideology, black pill ideology, incel stuff. So to counteract that, we're just going to stop dating. So all of that to say, Bumble obviously made this big mistake in their marketing. And sure, it might have been because there were no women in the room, or it might have been because they didn't do pre-testing on the campaign. But what I think also happened is that Bumble didn't have a strong understanding of why young women are putting up these dating boundaries and the culture online that has fostered those boundaries. I think that this campaign is a fundamental misunderstanding of internet culture and Gen Z internet culture. So, one day after the backlash really exploded online, Bumble issued a statement and actually apologized. So, they wrote, "To our beloved Bumble community, we made a mistake. Our ads referencing celibacy were an attempt to lean into a community frustrated by modern dating, and instead of bringing joy and humor, we unintentionally did the opposite. Some of the perspectives we heard were from those who shared that celibacy is the only answer when reproductive rights are continuously restricted, from others for whom celibacy is a choice, one that we respect, and from the asexual community for whom celibacy can have a particular meaning and importance, which should not be diminished. We are also aware that for many, celibacy may be brought on by harm or trauma. For years, Bumble has passionately stood up for women in marginalized communities and their right to fully exercise personal choice. We didn't live up to these values for this campaign, and we apologize for the harm it caused." So this apology has actually been received quite well, as far as I've seen. It was very quick, which we appreciate. You know, the general consumer, if you sit on something for too long, it makes us feel like you are conspiring with PR teams. And like, we know that every brand and every big celebrity influencer that apologizes has a team behind them helping them, but it makes it feel more authentic if it's a really quick apology. So it was very quick. It was explained really well, like what they did wrong, why it was wrong, who they hurt, what they said about being hurt. And then they finished by saying what they're going to be doing. So they said, "We're removing these ads from our global marketing campaign. Bumble will be making a donation to the National Domestic Violence Hotline, among other organizations, as a part of our ongoing efforts to support the work being done around the world to support women, marginalized communities, and those impacted by abuse. We will also be offering these partners this billboard space to display an ad for their choice for the duration of our reserved billboard time." So, of course, giving a tangible example of how they're going to use this and make good from it by giving that billboard space away and making those donations. In general, this was a very good apology. I think this is the last misstep of this magnitude that we will probably see from them. I don't think they'll do anything like this ever again. I think they'll be much more aware and much more conscious. And I think at the end of the day, after getting an apology like that, that's all we can ask for, right? Is just you stick to what you said, which is this went against our values. Let's get back to our core values. All right, guys. Well, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this little kind of like a mini breakdown, a mini deep dive. As I said, I will have more stories for you guys tomorrow. Okay, guys, thank you so much for listening. I love you guys, and I will talk to you tomorrow. Bye.